It's good to see everyone.
Yeah. Let's go ahead and get started. And the first thing I'm going to do is mute everybody. And let's see. Okay. And I will go over a few things about how the reading will work. First, I'm Kelly Rowe. I'm an Able Muse author, and I'll be your host today. But before I get started, I'd like to pass the mic to Alex Pepple, the Able Muse publisher and editor. I know that all of we authors feel really lucky to have had the chance to work with him. And we have him to thank for these great monthly online poetry readings. So, Alex, I'm going to pass things to you.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for coming out this afternoon for another fun afternoon of poetry reading. And tonight, this afternoon, we'll have really three very different books to enjoy. There's Jennifer, who has a second collection with Able Muse, A Strong Feather. And this has garnered some really good reviews from places like Publishers Weekly. And it's really a great act following up her original Indigenous, which is of the same series. Congratulations, Jennifer. And we have Ben. Ben has some previous poetry collections with us, but this time he did something different with the collection of essays about parenting and poetry and a whole bunch of other things mixed in. And this is also very, it also has some good reviews. This Ben's book, as you all know, is called Writing While Parenting. And finally, we have Bob, who has our very first collection for children and others. And this one has been a big runaway hit so far with 3-star reviews from very prestigious review venue like Book List, Library Journal, Children Library Journal, and also from what was the other one, Bob? Anyways, so
Kirkus Reviews, I think, is the third.
Thank you. And Kirkus Review. So congratulations, Bob, on such a stellar debut, and also it's his debut collection, so which is even more impressive. So with that, I'll urge everyone to support the authors by buying their books, and they can be found at the press website, which is very easy to remember, ablemusepress.com. So just go there and you will see all the books. And also I have to remind everyone that the reading period for the regular submissions to the Able Muse Press, to Able Muse, the journal, not the press, Able Muse, the journal is still open. And that goes on till July 15, when the submission window will close. And for that, just go to ablemuse.com, which is the journal's website. And we'll have one of our editors for the journal here, Jean Kryling. Say hi, Jean. So with that, without further ado, I'm glad that we'll have Kelly running the proceedings this afternoon. As you know, she's one of our Able Muse Press authors, and she's a recent winner of the Able Muse Book Award with her recently released collection, Rise Above the River. So thank you, Kelly, and take it away.
Okay, I'll do my best here. Hi, everyone. Just a few housekeeping items as we get started. As Alex pointed out, we have 3 marvelous writers, very different from each other, reading today. So I think we're going to have a very varied and interesting experience. Each reader will have about 15 minutes to read. And then after all three have read, we'll have a question and answer session. After each reader has finished, I will allow you all to unmute yourselves and applaud for them. But otherwise, please keep yourselves muted. And if you have anything to say, you have the chat room. If you want to express something in the middle of reading because you love a line or you love something they're saying, feel free to add something in the chat room. With no further ado, we are going to start with Jennifer Reeser. And Jennifer is the author of 7 collections of poetry. Most recently, as Alex mentioned, Strong Feather, just out this year, which Publishers Weekly called an excellent collection full of artistry and meaning. Preceding it was Indigenous, again from Able Muse Press, which was awarded Best Poetry Book of 2019 by Englewood Review of Books. Her first book, An Alabaster Flask, was the winner of the WordPress First Book Prize, and X.J. Kennedy wrote about that book. Her debut ought to have been a candidate for a Pulitzer. Her third book, Sonnets from the Dark Lady and Other Poems, was a finalist for the Donald Justice Prize. Her fourth, La Lowry Horror, debuted as an Amazon bestseller in the category of epic poetry. Reeser's poems, reviews, and translations of Russian, French, Cherokee, and other Native American languages have appeared in Poetry, Rattle, the Hudson Review, Recours au Poème, Light Quarterly, The Formalist, The Dark Horse, at Salt, Able Muse, and elsewhere. A biracial writer of European American and Native American Indian ancestry, Reeser was born in Louisiana. She studied English at college in Oklahoma and also at McNeese State University in Louisiana. She now divides her time between the Louisiana Gulf Coast and her land on the Cherokee Reservation in Indian Country near Tahlequah, Oklahoma, capital of the Cherokee Nation, of which her family is a part. Jennifer, I've had the chance to read some of your poems in Strong Feather. It's going to be wonderful to hear you read them out loud. So take it away.
Thank you so much, Kelly. I really appreciate your patience while I was delayed getting on here. And great congratulations on your win there. Alex, thanks so much also for the call. I was right in the middle of trying to get into the room when the phone rang, so that's why I couldn't answer you. I'm going to start this reading with a signature poem from the central character of the book, who is Strong Feather. And as you can see in some of the précis and the synopses of the book, Strong Feather is a sort of poet, prophet, warrior figure. And this one it's a villanelle, and it is entitled Strong Feather Reveals Herself. They told you I would come, and here I stand, in doeskin, poorly covered, though well versed, as prophesied, as preordained, as planned. A bow upon my back, a pen in hand, perhaps not most exalted, but the first. They told you I would come, and here I stand. My blisters as I shuffle through hot sand are gruesome, but I neither starve nor thirst. As prophesied, as preordained, as planned. A woman, independent and unmanned, by Mother Nature birthed, by nature nursed. They told you I would come, and here I stand. No Lamb of God am I, no promised land do I procure, but look, the storm clouds burst as prophesied, as preordained, as planned. Descending fluff of doves drifts down, a band of rainbows shows as thunder is dispersed. They told you I would come, and here I stand, as prophesied, as preordained, as planned. This next poem is a sort of personal poem. As you see in my bio, my family is part of the Cherokee Nation. And my sister actually married a former chief of the tribe who was Chief Joe Bird. And I follow the tribal politics. I get the newsletters from the councils and from the departments in the Cherokee government. And I listen to the addresses that are given by the chief to the nation. And I was particularly taken by this one gathering of the 5 civilized tribes in Arkansas. And former Chief Joe Bird, who is a cousin of my brother-in-law, gave a very, very moving address to the 5 tribes there. And I was so moved by it that I had to respond with this poem. It is called "To Former Chief Bird as the 5 Civilized Tribes Convene." Councilman Bird, as you address each 5 we recognize, each a civilized tribe, preserved and representative, alive. What privilege if a witness might inscribe a column in remembrance of these days. The podium avows your presence, you full-hearted, blooded focus of my praise. The first among all Cherokee chieftains who would speak both tongues, and therefore could unite 2 cultures in himself, the red and white. Like some true modern from the classic past, forget the negatives, let us unite, you say. This is the first time, not the last. Together let us come, let's make things right. By sharing culture, sharing every way, we will redo the history once done. Through national uncertainty today, we'll tell how our Creator makes us one, the real story of how we came to be, presenting them the seal of Cherokee. The ceremony's blessed by Chickasaw prayer. A stomp dance starts, and while a tribesman passes, I see grandfather's chosen style of hair, his profile, and the black frames of his glasses. Finish the anthem, choir of the young, for you've no precedent in history. Half in the English, half the native tongue. Let it be sung, and do not look at me. As he would be, so true to life and proud of our descent, I catch my breath aloud. I have to add here that for some understanding of the poem, he is a historic figure really in the tribe because he was the first chief of the Cherokee Nation who spoke both the Cherokee native language and English, All previous chiefs had either spoken only in the native tongue or only in English. And so there's a little footnote to that, I suppose you could say. My next poem is a little triolet or triolet in form. I am the mother of children. My children were born untypically. They were born out of hospital by the old ways through a midwife. And we practiced untraditional methods in it, I suppose, if you're thinking hospital. But this stirred my imagination to write to the last Cherokee midwife. I was not attended by her. I was attended by a woman, a very spiritual other midwife who had children of her own, and my children would grow up to play with her Choctaw children also. But this is called To the Last Cherokee Midwife. Bring me burr root syrup, Quadee, brewed into a cherry tea, as if you were a British lady. Bring me burr root syrup, Quadee, pick in thickets lush and shady, midwife of the Cherokee. Bring me burr root syrup, Quadee, brewed into a cherry tea. This is one of my historical monologues. The book Strong Feather is heavy in personas. There is not only the Strong Feather character, but there are also other personas in the book, and many of them are actual historical figures. What I wanted to do was take well-known, famous addresses and statements that they had made and put them into form or put them into more memorable ways of remembering what they had said. This one is called Logan's Lament, and I'm not going to go into an exposition about Logan. You can look him up later, but this is prefaced by a comment from Thomas Jefferson himself in his Notes on the State of Virginia of 1785, in which he says, I may challenge the whole orations of Demosthenes and Cicero, and of any more eminent orator, if Europe has furnished more eminent, to produce a single passage superior to the speech of Logan, a Mingo chief, to Lord Dunmore when governor of this state. I call on any white man now to say if he has ever reached my cabin hungry, when Logan has not furnished him with meat, if he at any time came cold and naked, when Logan failed to cover him with clothing. Throughout the course of this enduring last bloody warfare, Logan has remained idly at home, an advocate for peace. My adoration of the whites was such that when I passed, my countrymen would point and say, he is an ally of the white man. I even thought to make my place with you, except for the abuses of one man, a colonel you called Cressup, who last spring in cold blood, unprovoked, not even sparing my wife and children, killed my kith and kin. There runs no single droplet of my blood within the veins of any living creature. And this has called on Logan for revenge. I've sought it. I've killed many. I have glutted my vengeance. For my country I rejoice beneath the beacon glimmerings of peace. But do not harbor any supposition that mine is the festivity of fear. Logan has not ever been faint-hearted. He turns not on his heel to save his life. To mourn for Logan, who remains not one. This is a little bit different, a little more lighthearted than that one was. And this is another personal poem, and it's dedicated to a Cherokee couple with whom I became acquainted many years ago at a powwow. They're Eastern band Cherokee, but they are terrific artists, and their name is Kicking Bird. The last name is Kicking Bird. They are tremendously talented artists who were there as part of the powwow group of vendors. And this is in a bit different meter. It's a tripping, more of a tripping, lighter verse, as I said. Native American prayer on an arrowhead hung at the doorway which leads to my library. Always your artwork henceforth will inspire me. When will I see you again, gifted Cherokee? Gasp at your sculpture and purchase your pottery. Speak to you closely with love brought from Gatlinburg. Well, I remember that powwow where you and I met, while the jingle dress girls strode with dignity past us, their hands on their hips in solemnity. Kind but bemused you appeared, as the ritual happened beyond us, amid your original striped clay creations, accepting yet skeptical. Firing your kiln in the Tennessee wilderness, etch for my sake the bold head of a buffalo. Sculpt for me, cousins, a wolf with a butterfly. Tables I see, filled with sages and savages, headdresses, feathers removed from their packages gingerly, so the baked clay takes no breakages. Fingers I see, your skilled hands moving merchandise here to there, transferring statues with eagle eyes, deft and astute as professional artisans. Obviously at a loss, for the craftsmanship stuns me, the 5 clays combined, the street media blended and carved with such cunning, I sing of it. This is another personal poem that's in a bit different form. It's one of the more obscure forms, as a matter of fact, that Lou Turco included in his monumental seminal book on form. This one is called, to preface it, my brother-in-law would like to open his own restaurant. He's a chef, he's a cook, he loves to cook. And he wants to open his own restaurant of indigenous cuisine there in Indian country where the rest of my family lives. And this is called To My Brother-in-Law Studying Indigenous Cuisine. Supportive of your tasteful mission, encouraging your ripe ambition, I send you this authoritative book. Look upon the native, that you fulfill your calling, Jeff, becoming an accomplished chef, sharing our indigenous cuisine, gleaning from it thus. May it delight, although you see its author is not Cherokee. Each recipe will whet the appetite. Bison ribs, dried apple, stuffed blossoms of the winter squash, prepared with sumac and panache. Sunflowers served in sage sautéed and braised, glazed hazelnut sorbet. The maker, a Lakota Sioux, with juniper and roast elk stew through the use of culinary ash, shuns the ordinary. The flowers made of acorn meal or turnips seem beyond what's real. Amaranth, which grows beside the road, thrown in oil and fried. Food fantasy, it seems, and yet such customs we must not forget. But, like our language, keep them on our tongue, young and never sour. Thank you.
Okay, you can unmute yourselves and let's give it up for Jennifer. Fantastic, Jennifer. Wow.
That was terrific. That was terrific work. Terrific.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Really good.
Really good. Yeah. Well, if I'm going to mute everybody again, and then I'd like to introduce Ben Berman, our second reader. Oh, okay, good. Everybody can hear me, right? I didn't mute myself. Okay. So Ben is the author of 4 books, 3 of which were published by Able Muse Press. 3 of them, as Alex mentioned, are books of poetry: Strange Borderlands, Figuring in the Figure, and oh, that's funny. I only have 2 of your poetry books listed here, Ben. But his new collection of essays, Writing While Parenting, just debuted this spring. He has won the Peace Corps Award for Best Book of Poetry, has twice been shortlisted for the Massachusetts Book Awards, and has received awards from the Massachusetts Cultural Council, New England Poetry Club, and Somerville Arts Council. He's been teaching for over 20 years and lives in the Boston area with his wife and 2 daughters. Ben, I understand that you'll be reading from your new book of essays on parenting, which is a subject close to my heart. So I'm really looking forward to hearing your essays. But would you also just tell the audience your 3rd book of poems that I somehow am missing from your bio before you start reading?
Yeah, no worries. The 3rd book is called Then Again.
Great. Great. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Kelly. What an absolute pleasure to be reading with Jennifer and with Bob. Jennifer, that was so powerful. I was shivering as I was listening to your music and your poetry. So thank you for starting us off with that.
Ben, can you get closer to the mic so you can be? Thank you.
Of course, I will go even louder. In perfect timing, because Alex, I wanted to thank you as well before I start reading. As Kelly mentioned, this is my 3rd book with Able Muse Press, and it has been such an honor to work with you, Alex. You are so thoughtful and respectful and kind and generous, and it has really been a pleasure and an honor to be part of this community. So thank you so much for continuing to believe in the work, and great appreciation. As Kelly mentioned, the book is called Writing While Parenting. It is short, literary, and humorous essays about the overlap between poetry and parenting. It is not a self-help book. There is nothing practical or helpful to learn. So I hope no one came in with any expectations. When my daughters are 12 and 9 now, but the book covers 5 years from starting from when they were 1 and 3 and going up until they were 6 and 8. And there was a long while when they were young, toddler age, that I was convinced that I was just going to have to give up writing entirely. So this one I'm going to start with is called Learning to Mine Those Everyday Moments. I'm between poems this morning which always makes me feel a little lost and anxious, like a puppy waiting for his owner to return home. So I start flipping through an old notebook where I used to gather inspirational quotes. Every morning I jump out of bed and step on a landmine, writes Ray Bradbury. The landmine is me. After the explosion, I spend the rest of the day putting the pieces together. But reading this only adds to my disquiet, makes me wonder if I'm spending more and more time between poems these days because my life has grown too tame. After all, when I jumped out of bed this morning, I didn't step on a landmine. I stepped on a small plastic princess and had to flail silently about so as not to wake my wife and daughters. And I begin to worry that the domestic life has domesticated my imagination. I start flipping through my notebook to see if I can find some inspiring quotes about changing diapers or doing dishes or cutting the crust off peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. Creativity is piercing the mundane to find the marvelous, writes Bill Moyers. That could work, I think. I have my thumb on the pulse of the mundane. But after spending 20 minutes working on a poem titled Searching for Blue Sippy, the sippy bottle that my daughter misplaced and cannot live without, I decide to keep on thumbing. The best time for planning a book, writes Agatha Christie, is while you're doing the dishes. I like this quote, but would like it even more if Agatha Christie explained when the best time for writing said book was. We should always do something that makes us feel like a child, writes Rita Dove. And for a moment, I consider walking around the house and pulling all the books off the shelves, then leaving them on the floor for someone else to pick up. But instead, I keep flipping and flipping and flipping until I find this one by Robert Bly. When a contemporary man looks down into his psyche, he may, if conditions are right, find under the water of his soul, lying in an area no one has visited for a long time, an ancient hairy man. That is it, I think. I have lost touch with my ancient hairy man and need to delve deep into my psyche to reconnect with my inner brute, need to rescue the wild man from the caverns of my soul, need to unleash my untamed. Papa, my 4-year-old says from behind me, can you come downstairs and make us some pancakes with those little M&Ms in them? I look up and see her reflection in the window, and I realize that my window to write is now over. I take my daughter's hand and we walk downstairs where my 2-year-old is drawing all over the kitchen tiles with purple Sharpies. I heat up a pan, throw in a pat of butter, and begin searching through the cabinets for leftover Halloween candy. And I start to worry that I will never write another poem again. Writing is utter solitude, writes Kafka, the descent into the cold abyss of oneself. But I can't even pee these days without my 2-year-old banging on the door, begging to watch me make bubbles. The butter starts to turn from sizzle to burn, and I can't help but see this as yet another metaphor for my life that I don't have time to explore. But when one is highly alert to language, James Tate writes, then nearly everything begs to be a poem. My 2-year-old walks over to my 4-year-old and rips the frozen microphone out of her hands. Mine, she yells, mine. And as though my kitchen has turned into a minefield, not so unlike Ray Bradbury's, suddenly things start to explode. All right, the next one I'm going to read is when my daughters are a little bit older. It's called Why Finding the Right Image Can Be So Challenging. So one of the things that I love to do when I'm writing poems is I love to draw them out in the margins. And every time I get to an image, I start sort of, a giant brainstorm of every possible imagistic link I could make. I really love the visual leap. And part of the fun is not just finding the right image, but the exploration of it. So I tried to dramatize it. And this one is called Why Finding the Right Image Can Be So Challenging. I placed the 6-pack of beer on the counter. The clerk looks up at me, then down at the beer, then back up at me, then leans in and says, I thought I was going to have to ID you when you first walked in. But now that you're up close, I can see all the gray hairs on your head. I'm not sure whether to be flattered that he thinks I look 20 years younger than I actually am, or upset that he's noticed that I'm starting to go gray. Although after I get home and examine my head in the mirror, I realize that there is something about the word gray that feels off, as though it's too generic a word to capture the intricate blending of complementing colors sprouting from my head. Later at dinner, I ask my wife and daughters if they'll help me find a more evocative, surprising, and accurate description of my hair. My wife suggests that my head looks like the love child of a panda and koala bear, but my 7-year-old seems downright offended that my wife would compare me to animals that are so adorably cute. What about storm clouds, I offer, or campfire smoke? Both of these images seem somewhat accurate in terms of color, and I like that they speak to the impending dangers of a midlife crisis. But there is something too billowy about their presence. The grays on my head aren't about to be blown away, and I need an image that is more accurately textured. Salt and pepper, my wife suggests. That one's familiar, of course, and I kind of like it, but it feels imprecise. My hair is mostly the color of pepper with a little dash of salt mixed in. Pepper and salt would be more accurate, but even then, the secondary meaning of the word pepper seems to suggest that it is the black peppered about. Part of the challenge is that I want to find an image that speaks to the rapid change of aging. For 40 years, I have enjoyed thickly settled jet black hair. And now all of a sudden, it is as though the top of my head is being gentrified. Little white clusters popping up all over the place. I think your hair is beautiful, says my 5-year-old, like the color of a princess's poop. This comparison is certainly surprising, evocative, and tonally complex. But unless that princess has been taking iron supplements, it is also totally inaccurate. And yet I appreciate the absurdity of my 5-year-old suggestion and how it frees my mind to traverse the surreal. It's never easy coming up with an image that works on both a literal and figurative level. And I am looking for something that is visually accurate, but also reflective of my resistance to the fact that my youthfulness is beginning to fade. My hair's not just gray, I suddenly say, it's Dorian gray. My daughters look at me like I'm an idiot. And even though there isn't anything visual about that line, there's something about the mixture of seriousness and playfulness that I like. I've always considered myself young at heart, but now my body is starting to tell a different story. And later, when I sneak into the bathroom and use tweezers to pluck a white hair or 3, I can't help but feel an ancient literary pull, a deep and existential tug. All right, this next one is called What I've Learned About Literary Movements from My Daughters. My older daughter has always been transfixed by the moon. When she was a baby, she would sit on the back porch and watch it rise over our neighbor's house. She would clap her hands wildly and rub her chest. Please, she would beg me to climb into the night sky and retrieve it for her. And although it's been 7 years since those enchanting evenings, she still finds so much delight, say, in spotting a faded crescent among the morning clouds. There is something about her relationship with the moon that reminds me of the great romantic poet, the way she believes in our transcendent connection to nature, stares up at the sky with a never-ending sense of fascination. My younger daughter, on the other hand, is obsessed with a different kind of moon. Why wait for the waxing and waning of some faraway thing when you can walk into any room, drop your pants and let the world know I got your moon right here. For while my older daughter might be a firm subscriber to the ideals of romanticism, my younger daughter has aligned herself with the modernists and their grand, sweeping rejection of decorum. Not that she's necessarily trying to evoke the moral decay and wasteland of the Western world every time she hitches her thumbs into her waistband and launches into the old yank and bend. Nor do I think that she's interested in reminding us of Freud's notion that we all long for more authentic ways to express our hidden selves. Mostly, I think she just loves the power of being able to shift the mood in the room whenever she hears adults speaking in hushed tones, or when she senses something solemn in the air. Literary movements come and go, and isms wax and wane. But watching my daughters reminds me that we must always make room for both reverence and irreverence in whatever we write. Find ways to accept that life is simultaneously ridiculous and filled with so much splendor. I'm going to read one final one here. I just want to say too, Zoom was an absolute nightmare when it came out because it was the peak of my younger daughter's mooning phase. So it was just like, soon as she saw someone on the computer, all of a sudden I'd see in the background of my computer and I would have to stop video. So I would never go to unmuting, but stopping video. Father's instinct came in. I'm going to read one short one. It's called Playing with Matches. We're late for school, and my 5-year-old is getting undressed. We gotta go, I say. Sorry, she says, my underwear doesn't match my sweater. Does that really matter? I say. She looks up from the hamper, raises a single eyebrow, then continues digging through the dirty laundry. And although I'm tempted to point out that no one will ever know whether the trimming of her underwear matches the flowers on her sweater, that chances are she's going to take off her sweater the second she gets to school. As a poet, I understand the importance of hidden patterns. A poem is an instant of lucidity in which the entire organism participates, right, Charles Simic? And there is something about metaphor and conversation with form, imagery, playing off diction that feels essential to the workings of a poem. And yet I'm wary of anything that fits too neatly together, that feels too tightly orchestrated. Earlier this week, my 5-year-old pirouetted herself into a wall, and hearing her cry, my 2-year-old came running over to the rescue. Put these on your boo-boo, she said, handing her a box of tampons. There is something about disjunction that is at the heart of both poetry and parenting. It speaks to the way that our lives are filled with interruptions and non sequiturs. How my wife and I discuss the stresses of our jobs between bouts of shaking the sillies out. Last night, as I was putting my daughters to sleep, my 5-year-old said, I love you so much, it makes my heart burst. And then my 2-year-old announced from the other side of the room, I love you so much, and I like to play with toads. And I was reminded of why I wake up so early every morning to read and write poems with all their imprecise meanings and tangling of tone. Thank you, everyone.
Unmute everyone. And it was fabulous.
Ben, that was
Wonderful.
delightful.
That was
Really
wonderful.
delightful.
Wonderful.
True.
Really nice. It was wonderful.
Fantastic.
Your moon poem is magic.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Yeah. Really great.
Thank you so much, Ben.
It took me back a long way to the time where I thought I would never write a poem again. And then I did. So thanks. That was just wonderful. I'm going to mute everyone again. And then I will have a chance to introduce Robert Schechter, Robert has written many adult books and won many awards, including the X.J. Kennedy Book Award and the Willis Barnstone Translation Prize. But today he's going to read from his new book from Word Galaxy Press, which is an imprint of Able Muse Press. The Red Ear Blows Its Nose, Poems for Children and Others. The book was published this spring, in fact, just had its launch and has already made a big splash. It has received starred reviews in School Library Journal, Kirkus Reviews, and Booklist. Booklist said, the book is all in all a great classroom resource, as well as an entertaining and illuminating collection. And School Library Journal said that these poems are for reading aloud, to laugh at, to muse on, and to grow up with. Ken Nesbitt, the former Children's Poet Laureate, called The Red Ear Blows Its Nose a dazzling tour de force that sparkles with Schechter's witty, wonderful wordplay. Read this book. Your brain will thank you. Mine did. Robert, reading your new book reminded me of how I loved poetry when I was a child, because it was just another way to play. Thanks for sharing your children's poems with us today. And I think we all need more opportunities to laugh. So thanks very much.
I just want to say thank you for that wonderful introduction. I wish it were all true, but this is my first book, not just my first book of children's poems, but I have never had a book before. I'm very thankful that Alex decided to contact me one day and ask me if I had anything to submit. That wasn't that long ago. I think it's less than a year ago that I signed my contract with Word Galaxy, and as you mentioned, the book is out and underway. So things move very fast, at least with Word Galaxy Press. As I say, I thank you to Alex for publishing the book, but also he's got a lot to do with how the book came about, because as I think all of you know, he is also the proprietor of Erratosphere, and I have been a member of Erratosphere for 20 years or so, and that's the period during which these poems were written. A few of them, and the early ones, were even posted there and helped along by the wonderful people who frequent that site. Most of them weren't, but Erratosphere was really one of the centers of my writing life throughout this whole period, and so a lot of the book was a lot of what the book is right now, and the very existence of the book is owed to Alex, and I thank him a lot for that. Now I'll try to pick a few poems and not go over my time. They're all very short, so probably could pack quite a few poems in the 15 minutes, but I'll try not to overdo it. One of the subjects that I write about a lot for some reason is the brain, and the book opens with a poem called My Brain. I'm proud of my brain. It's bursting with bunches of concepts and inklings and notions and hunches, and lots of big numbers it expertly crunches, and facts and opinions it nibbles and munches, all while my forehead so thoughtfully scrunches. The next poem in the book is called Colors, and this is a poem that I do remember posting at Erratosphere, I don't know, maybe 20 years ago, and it was also went on to be my first published poem in Highlights for Children. It's called Colors. If I could go inside your head and use your eyes to see, I wonder if what you call red would look like red to me. Inside your head, Perhaps I'd think what looks like red to you resembles more a shade of pink or purple mixed with blue. I cannot solve this mystery. Are colors just a name? If I were you and you were me, would we see things the same? And this next poem is more recent. It's called It's All Me. And well, nothing to say about it, but to read it. I'll just read it. It's all me. I've sometimes been someone, sometimes been no one. The fast as they come one, the lazy and slow one. Sometimes the chum one, sometimes the faux one. The sit and be mum one, the stand up and crow one. The hopelessly dumb one, the cool in the know one. The moping and glum one, the cheeks all aglow one. The bang on a drum one, the volume down low one. The merely humdrum one, the big fancy show one, the I've no green thumb one, the I make things grow one, the place where I'm from one, the place where I go one. This next poem is the poem that gives the book its title. The poem is called What's Mine, but the red ear blows its nose is a phrase that you'll hear in a moment is in the poem, and it's one of many phrases that was coined for the sole purpose of never having been said before, and it ended up being a very good title for the book, because if there's, by definition, there's no other book that has this title, and you don't get anything else when you put the book title into Google other than this book, because it's never been said before. But there are some other things that have never been said before if you're looking for a title like that for yourself. Things that no one's said before include the red ear blows its nose. I noodled waffles to the door. The slipper broke my shoulder's toes. But what about the squiggly spoon that ate a penguin's piece of pie beneath a buttered slice of moon beyond a sloppy slab of sky? Though almost everything's been said, how sad the pizzas climbed the peak and cheese now tops the oyster bed, are words I am the first to speak. And surely if I say the fox has cartwheeled through the slide trombone in search of nylon bowling socks, these words belong to me alone. Supposing you were me, you'd use my mouth to eat and drink. You'd use my brain to have a think. If you caught cold, you'd blow my nose. To take your picture, I would pose. You'd use my voice to raise a cheer. To listen up, you'd use my ear. For standing tall, you'd use my feet. You'd use my tush to take a seat. If I drank water, you would pee. That is, supposing you were me. Brain break. It's quiet now inside my head. Not much is brewing there. My brain is on a break today, without a thought or care. No inklings and no notions spin round inside this globe. Silence drapes a quilt of hush on each off-duty lobe. Tomorrow, I might call on it to think a thought or two, to solve a riddle, turn a phrase, to mutter something true, to wonder how a bird can fly, to ponder till I ache. Today, though, I won't even try. My brain is on a break. Here. I don't know how I'm doing for time, but I forgot to look at the clock when I started. So could you tell me
Yeah, you have about 5 more minutes.
Okay, great. Thank you. Sorry.
Yeah.
Alrighty. I'm sorry. Skin deep. My zebra often whines and gripes how bored she is with having stripes. She says she's jealous of the leopard, whose fur with dots and spots is peppered. My leopard's jealous in reverse. He thinks that dots and spots are worse, and gladly would he trade them in to wear the stripes of zebra skin. I tell my zebra having fur with stripes looks marvelous on her. I tell my leopard he should not deny the beauty of the dot. And in the end, they both agree. At least they say they're not like me without a pattern or design. How rude they are, these pets of mine. And there's one more I wanted to read. I'll finish on it. Oh my goodness, I'm sorry. Okay. My champion bee. My bee's in the biz of buzzing and is the world's greatest whiz at creating a buzz. She's the best that there was and the best that there is. She zags and she zigs, she zips and she zooms on flowers and twigs full of zinnia blooms. No one asks, is she sufficiently busy? My bee's in a tizzy. She's making me dizzy. Her thorax is fuzzy. I love her because she hums without singing and doesn't like stinging. Her business is buzzing. She sucks from a dozen flowers her cousin the fly never was in. The blooms that she's chosen to stick her bee nose in are those pollen grows in and sweet nectar flows in. She hovers there frozen as if she were posing, but she's only sipping. The fuel's still more zipping and zagging and zooming after resuming her dance through the blooming blossoms perfuming throughout honey season, the garden my bees in. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
If you'd like to read one more, you have the time.
Okay, let me see. Quickie.
I am really pleased you read the one about the bee. It's one of my favorites. So
I'm so glad. Here's one called Unlucky. I'm an unlucky fella, there is no doubt. I bought an umbrella, we had a drought. I bought a hanky, my nose didn't run. I bought a burger, then lost my bun. I bought a spare tire, then got no flat. I bought a ball, then broke my bat. I bought a coffin, it's worth a try. With my bad luck, I might not die.
fantastic. Unmute everybody. So
Yay,
Bob can hear you.
Bob, that is just brilliant. Just brilliant.
Thank you.
What an ear.
Great.
Oh, I really loved all the music in your poems. And I think that is a reason that children love poetry with lots of rhyme and rhythm. And it was just fantastic. So
Bob's ear is just incredible.
yeah.
Yeah.
Bob, I wish that when I was a poet in the schools, I had your book. There was Richard Wilbur's Opposites, and there was Kenneth Cope. So I really would have liked to have had that book.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Mhm. Well, I think now we will move to the question and answer portion of our reading. And the way I would like to do this is I would like to mute everybody. And when you have a question, demute yourself. And let's start with Jennifer, and we'll have maybe 5 minutes, maybe a little bit more, for you to ask Jennifer things you'd like to know about her work process, her poems, her new book, and so on. So I am going to mute everybody, but feel free to demute.
Yes, I have a question, if that's okay, for Jennifer. I was wondering if you might be willing to share with us a little bit more about your engagement with form or received form. You mentioned Louis Turco, and I'd certainly probably need to know a lot more about like the current state of like modern Indigenous poetry, right, in North America. But my perception is that, like all poets, those of us who are sort of enamored by still playing around with these forms are far outnumbered by those who prefer to play in free verse. So yeah, I'd just be kind of curious, like where that started for you. Thank you.
Yes, I love that question. Thank you so much for asking. It is something that I have just always had an inclination towards. Even in the very beginning, my mother says that my favorite activity would be to stand by the window when my father was in the military. I would stand by the window and listen to the soldiers, the warriors, go by and chant their cadences. And she said that I would just stand there forever and listen to them. So I just always loved the rhythm and sound of rhyme and words from the very beginning. I guess I was only 3 years old at the time, but yes, you're very right. And I think in the past few years, Sherman Alexie has kind of toyed around a little bit with some forms, as I saw. I don't know what he's doing lately, but Lucy Tapahanso also, there are moments that she would incline towards a more formal type of delivery. I don't know that I would ever call her a formalist. She's not, but a little more structure to those things. Those are the two main ones that come to mind when I think of it.
When did you start to write poems, formal poems? Was it in college or high school? I mean, I know you were 3 when you
Yeah.
developed your interest, but then, like, did you have a teacher who
Yeah.
invited you to write a sonnet or something?
I was 11 years old, and I had moved to a new school. Like I said, my father was in the military. We got moved around a lot in my early years. But I was 11 years old, and I came to one school, and our very first assignment in English class was a creative writing unit that lasted for 6 weeks' time. We would have to come in every morning, and the teacher would provide a prompt for us, either a short story to be written or a poem to be written. And we had to do one every single day for that, for a 6-week period. Yes, it was really intense, and it was really intense. But right off the bat, I started writing limericks for it, and I started writing poems in form that rhymed, and they had meter. I just had an ear for it. I can't explain it any other way. No one had ever taught me those forms. I was just doing it by instinct, by my nature. So I was 11, and I still actually have that notebook. We got to decorate it, and I put cowboys on horseback on the front. I took those old Marlboro ads, from the magazine. I really haven't changed much. It was cowboys and Indians then. It's cowboys and Indians now. But I never stopped after that. I just kept going because I loved it so much. Thank you for the question.
Anyone else? There.
Yeah. Hi, it's Ellen. Can you hear me?
Hi, Ellen. Yes, I hear you.
Hi, Jennifer, I have an anthology that has some translations of yours from the Russian.
Mhm.
correct? Could you just say a little about that work that you've done, that kind of translation?
The Russian of Anna Akhmatova.
Yes.
Several years ago, I heard and started reading Anna Akhmatova in translation.
Oh, okay.
And I just thought this stuff is so beautiful in the translations that I was reading, and they were free verse translations too. They weren't her original. I said these things were so beautiful in even in the free verse translations that I was reading and listening to. I said I have to learn the Russian language so that I can read her and understand it in Russian. So I learned Russian and began to translate these things, and then I sought out her licensing because I thought, well, maybe I'll just try and see if I can get this stuff out there. I located her agents in Moscow, the agency that handles the authorizations, and I wrote to them and I sent them my first translations, and I have had a very good relationship with them since then. They have never turned me down for a translation to be published anywhere. And we've just had a great working relationship after that. And they seem to like it. I was part of a panel many years ago. I was invited by Dana Joya and Mike, who ran the West Chester Poetry Conference, to be on a panel of Russian translators and Russian poets who would come over for a meeting of us all together, and they told me not to bother with some of the translations I was doing because I really didn't have the style and the voice down. But they said, now with Akhmatova, for some reason the two of you just seem to work. You click together. Keep going with the Akhmatova. So I was encouraged by that, and I just barreled ahead after that, and I still do them. I had a translation appear in a national magazine. I think it was last year or the year before, but I still go on those.
Well,
Thank you so
you.
much. Thank you so much for the question, Ellen. I appreciate the question.
Thank you.
Sure. I would like to move us on now to Ben, and if anybody has any questions for Ben, this is the time. I would actually love to start, Ben. I assume from hearing your essays that your children are making appearances in your poems. Is that true? And could you talk about that a little bit? Because I certainly, as a parent, I found that my daughter, without my intending it, became a big subject for me. So,
Yes, yeah, no, so it's a wonderful question. I write about my kids, or I used to write about my kids all the time. I write about them a little bit less now that they feel like real people, as opposed to, metaphors and material for my writing. But for me, it was such a transformation, I think, to go from, a human being to a father. It was so much of a, emotional transformation that I think in many ways, that was the sort of primary emotional input in my life. And so it was the thing that I was naturally moving to in terms of my writing.
yeah. And did the essays emerge from a place of feeling like there wasn't time for the poems, but maybe you could jot down some notes and some quick prose? Or
Yeah, that's a great question. Essays actually spanned my work on 2 different books, and I was given a opportunity to write a column for a great writing organization here in Boston called Grub Street Writers. And so once a month, I would start writing these essays for sort of aspiring writers to talk about craft or creativity. And, you know, I was sort of using my kids as metaphors, little anecdotes or funny moments from them as a way to sort of move into writing about writing. So it was sort of the thing that I was doing to take a break from the poetry that I was working on. And then eventually it became the thing that I was more interested in writing. And I found myself taking a break from the poetry more and more to work on these and outside of the Grub Street column. So
Yeah.
they sort of found a form of their own.
Ah, interesting. Thank you.
Oh, I had a question. I loved your reading, and I loved how there one essay seemed more about the desperation of like, when will I ever have time to write again, which I know very well. And then, you know, with the essay where your daughter very charmingly said, my sweater does not match my underwear. I must change it. And I loved what you said about like, oh, I get it. I understand hidden patterns. And so there seemed like a different kind of attitude between those two, where like then it was like the poetic mind and the parent mind were like kind of melding together a little bit. And so I loved the range you showed us. And I was wondering like how you found yourself writing between like poetry and prose and like thinking poetically through both of them. If there was a difference for you in composition or, you know, drafting, anything like that.
That's a wonderful question. You know, for me, some of my transition from poetry to prose was a natural thing when my kids were real little, because to work on poetry, where you have to pay so much attention to language in all of its many senses, it was really hard to get to a computer or pen and paper when in the mornings I was like bouncing with my daughter, just desperately trying to get her back to sleep. But in doing that, my imagination was sort of running, and I was moving into this dream world that afterwards I could move and write down. And so prose just became a more natural state of writing for me when my kids were younger, because I was so tired all the time. But I came to really enjoy it, and I came to really sort of think about, you know, how do you apply some, you know, poetry and essays, I think, are so similar in some ways in terms of, you know, exploring the interior life and testing how far of an associative leap you can make as you jump from one idea to the next. But they're also very different. And I think my first attempts at writing these felt very much like poems. And at some point I sort of had to abandon that and lean into the narrative a little bit more.
Thank you. Well, it's great work. Thank you so much for it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So maybe one more question. Don't be shy.
Can I cede so that I can ask a question to Jennifer?
Absolutely.
Oh, good. Jennifer, I was going to ask you a question. I love the title of your collection and the juxtaposition of strong and feather. And I was wondering if you could just talk a little bit about the title and how you thought of it as the framing of the collection.
Sure. Thank you so much, Ben. I'm so honored to be with you guys. I just enjoyed your reading so much. And, you know, I have kids of my own, and I have memories of those days, you know, and you really know what is important. So that really comes through in your poetry. It was great. Thanks so much. But yes, as far as the title goes, I actually explain that in the first poem. The very first poem in the collection is in form, and it's a narrative about what happened. And this is true. It's a true poem. I came in one morning and I found a feather in my bed underneath the heavy covers that I have. I have no feathered bedding at all, and it was a very strong white feather that had been there. And I thought, you know, this seems to be a very, very strong feather. And just I had been looking for a subject for something to write on, and when those two came to mind, the strong feather, I immediately thought of traditional names of indigenous people, and it just seemed so right and so natural to it just jump started my imagination as far as, wow, this sounds like a character, an actual person to be named Strong Feather. And I began to wonder, now what would this person be like? and it was very organic after that. It just came to be a normal a normal natural flow after that. There was really, it was like rolling down a hill.
Hmm. Nice, nice. Well, we have one more reader, Robert, that we can ask a few questions to. Who would like to start?
Bob, I have a question for you. I was wondering, as you were working on these poems, which were so delightful to listen to and so fun to not just think about, but to hear, I was wondering if there were ever times that you were working on something and it became more complex than the form was allowing you to write about, and you started writing about in a different style or different form. Or was this sort of the primary way that you were writing the entire time, that you were able to take these really complex ideas and find a way to fit them into the rollicking rhymes?
I usually don't really concentrate that hard on the ideas, as it were. If there's any additional depth to any of the poems in addition to its playfulness, that's sort of a welcome but unintended byproduct. It's sort of, if I'm more focused on the language when I write these poems, and I try to go where the rhymes take me, or where the meter takes me, and I don't have any, generally speaking, sometimes I just have an idea for a poem, but usually I just get my ideas that it happens after I get started. And I just, one of the reasons I like writing in rhyme and meter is I don't look at it as an obstacle all the time, or most of the time. I look at it as a suggestion. The rhyme and meter tells you sort of like what direction you need to go in when you're writing the poem. And then I just try to keep making sense while I obey the formal requirements of the poem. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But I don't start off with something that I want to say or express in particular.
So, do you start with a line of music in your head, something silly that comes through your brain, and then you're off to the races?
Well, yeah, I don't know if it's music, but just like often it's just forcing, I sit down, I have to write something. Now, what should I write? I always write at a computer, and you have to get something down, because that immediately, from infinite choices to make, you have that for me, it's the process of writing that generates the ideas, not the other way around.
Okay.
Yes,
So-
I've got a question.
Okay, shall I go? I was wondering if you tested out your poems on children before you wound up publishing.
No, I didn't.
What kind of responses you might have gotten?
Well, they were tested on children only indirectly, in that many of them appeared in magazines, and I wasn't there for the children reading them, but I presume that that the magazine editors know what is good for children and what's not good for children. But that's one of the but honestly, it's one of the fears I had in publishing this book. Like, I kind of like them, and a lot of grown-ups that I know like them, but I really hadn't tried them on children. And and so far, early indications are that at least some of the children are liking them, but I had no idea before. So I'm glad it's fun to finally. I never had a book before. I never had events before, and I've only had a few now. But I have, for the first time, had children reacting, and thank goodness they didn't throw anything. They laughed, so it was working.
Well, Bob, this is sort of a related question. You've clearly been writing children's poetry for years, many years. How did you start writing children's poetry?
I started attempting to write adult poetry, and from there, and from there, I fell into light verse, and light verse isn't very different from children's poetry in a way, depending upon what the subject that you're writing about is. And what really triggered it was a magazine in Scotland called Anon. It was a new magazine back then. I'm not sure if they're still around. They had a good run if it's over. But when they first started out, they announced that they would have a children's poets section of, they would give 10 pages to a single children's poet, and they would have someone illustrate it. So I didn't have 10 children's poems at the time. I had a couple that I thought might be children's poems from my light verse, and I sat and I wrote a submission for them, and they took it, which was very encouraging, and I found it was a lot of fun, and I just kept doing it. So.
Well, it's certainly a lot of fun to hear your poems. They were just wonderful.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. So
I have a question. Do we have time for one more question?
We do. We sure do.
Wonderful. So, Bob, I bought your book when it was during that 4-day period when it was 99 cents for Kindles, for the Kindle version. So I apologize for depriving you of some of your profit. But I was reading it through it, and I was quite impressed by the poems. And my question to you is, how did you decide what order to put the poems in?
Well, it was largely intuitive. It was, and when I first submitted it, the manuscript to Alex, and he wanted it, it was in a very different form. In fact, it had it had poems that didn't. It didn't have the same. Probably 90%, 80% of the poems were the same, but many changed. And I had it organized in sections, and it wasn't working. I'm not sure exactly what Alex's directive was, but clearly he wanted a different order. And so I went to work, and I came up with something that was more or less intuitive. I got comments back from Alex now and then about two poems, say, being too similar to be next to each other, or whatever reasoning. There was no formula. I mean, it wasn't. There's sort of groupings of poems thematically, but then there might be one later on in the book that could have gone with the original grouping. I just tried to pace it intuitively. There was no particular. Well, taking out the section headings, I think, was important. I didn't want to start labeling what the poems were supposed to be about, or what you're supposed to think about them. Just present them. So,
thank you.
Well, I'm going to mute everybody again for a minute. We have come to the end of our scheduled time, but I know some of you might have to leave, but I think it might be nice to take just 5-10 minutes and let each of our readers read one more piece before we go. If you could, Jennifer, would you please start us by reading one more poem?
Absolutely. Thank you for your graciousness. This has been a wonderful reading. I have very much enjoyed it. This is a sonnet, my favorite form, I think. It is called, this is the very last poem in my book. It is called Reservation. My reservation is a reservation where red paint gazes at his mobile phone, a transcendental Indian, alone adorned in the full feather of our nation, while Wildcat emulates his isolation, around his throat a choker made of bone, suspicious, steady, ready to disown his flesh and blood with no clear explanation. Along Main Avenue, they greet the tourists who hold a honeymooning hand and laugh, who claim, "We share your shame, we share your grief." But Wildcat and Red Paint, grim as jurists, arise to pose for one more photograph. And only their sad eyes show disbelief. Thank you so much.
Great way to finish, Jennifer. Thank you. Thank you. Ben, could you share a last piece with us?
Powerful way to finish.
Great.
It's called Labor of Love. When I first started telling friends that my wife and I were pregnant with our older daughter, my wife would shoot me a look to remind me that only one of us technically was pregnant. So I can't help but feel the pettiest of joys in the fact that my 4-year-old happens to believe that while her sister was born in the most conventional of ways, uterus, birth canal, she somehow managed to emerge out of my stomach. Furthermore, every time I tell some story about something that happened back in college, my younger daughter will nod her head and say, "Yeah, I remember that because I was in your belly back then." According to my 4-year-old, not only did she gestate inside my womb for the typical 3 trimesters, but she has always been inside me. I can't help but see this as a metaphor for writing. Most poets write the same poem over and over, writes Richard Hugo, and no matter how much I try to vary my subjects, I always end up tackling the same concerns, delving into the same lifelong mysteries that have always been burning inside me, as though every poem is leading me closer to finding my essential face. To complicate the matter, though, ever since my 4-year-old watched Happy Feet last year, she's been convinced that at some point during the pregnancy, I removed her from my womb and placed her inside of a penguin egg until it was time to hatch. And ridiculous as that sounds, this too feels like an apt metaphor for writing. Poetry might very well be a labor of love, but it is not an active labor. We cannot push our poems out. Instead, we must let them incubate, churn around below the threshold of consciousness as we high write, while simultaneously guarding and nurturing them as they develop, until they are too restless for the brittle containers of our design, until they are itching to break free and slip their way out. And what a delicate delight then to watch these miraculous little things waddle away from us as we pray from the depths of our beings that they survive the cold of this world on their own.
Marvelous. Really marvelous, Ben. Thank you. Yeah. And Bob, would you please read us another of your fun poems? And you'll have to unmute yourself.
Okay. I'm going to read one which is not in the book. It was written after the book was submitted. So I'm just reading it because it's the the only proof I have that I could still write after publishing the book. I feel like I feel like the book was everything, but no, there's one more for what it's worth. It's called Too Much Thinking. I was thinking too much lately, so my brain was growing hot. It's the friction of the neurons when you think with them a lot. And I knew it was important that I cool the neurons down. And so I asked my mother, would she take me into town? She said, have you been thinking? Why, I warned you if you did, that your brain could catch on fire and your skull could pop its lid. But I knew by how she chuckled that she would not let me down. I said, I must have ice cream. And she drove me into town.
Fabulous. Let's give one more great round of applause to these three wonderful readers. Everybody can unmute themselves. Thank you.
Great job, everyone. Very enjoyable.
Wonderful.
Nice.
Thank you.
Bravo,
Thank you
bravo.
for having me, for coming, and thank you for,
Well
I really
done.
enjoyed Jennifer and Ben's reading as well. It was a wonderful time. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you, everybody.
So where our reading is done, it's kind of hard to let our readers go. I feel like I could listen a lot longer to each one of them, but I'm very busy. I have something to do, and it's to get on the Able Muse website and buy some books. And I encourage you all to join me. So thank you for coming today. And Alex, thank you so much for making this possible. It's really been a wonderful afternoon. Mhm. So you can unmute.
Thank you, Kelly, for hosting.
Oh, thanks.
Thank you, Kelly. You are an amazing lady. I can see that. Alex, of course, it goes without saying that Alex is amazing, but thanks, Bob. It was just, I think, I've known you for decades, and this is the first time I've ever seen you read like this before, anyway. So it was wonderful to see you and Ben. And Ben, like I said, it's important. So thanks for everyone. This was a great, great way to spend my time.
Agreed.
I agree.
Thank you to Jennifer. Thank you, Ben and Bob.
Alex, take care, everyone.
Great job, Kelly. Good hosting.
Thank you. Did my best.
Goodbye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.